I worked the night shift at St. Mary's Hospital. It was a few months ago, and I wanted to save some money for medical school. I was 31 and had been at the hospital for over a year. Most nights were routine, filled with the hum of machines. But one particular night, I experienced things that still haunt me. It started as a normal shift. I was checking on Mrs. Jenkins, an elderly woman who often got confused. When I leaned closer, I felt a sudden chill. It was like someone opened a freezer next to me. I brushed it off and went back to the nurse's station. As I walked, I thought I heard someone call my name. "James," it said softly. I stopped, looked around, but the hallway was empty. I told myself it was nothing, but my stomach felt tight. The next nights grew stranger. I was walking down a dim corridor when the lights flickered above me. This happened again and again, like a bad film stuck on repeat. I tried to shake off the feeling by checking up on other patients faster. One night, I noticed a door slightly ajar when I was sure I had locked it. My heart raced as I pushed it open. The room was empty, just the machines beeping. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been there. I would hear whispers in deserted rooms. I stood still, straining to catch the words, but they vanished. I tried to convince myself it was just the draft, or that I was tired. Still, I felt watched. I didn't admit it to anyone, but I started to dread the long hours. It felt like something was lurking, waiting for me to look away. On another night, the unease grew. I paused outside a room, hands clammy and heart pounding. I took a deep breath and stepped in. It was quiet, but I heard whispering. Curious and scared, I moved closer. That's when I heard it again. "James," it called, clear as day. A shiver ran down my spine. I spun around, but was alone. I didn't know what to do. Should I call for help? I listened for sounds of life. Then, I heard it again. This time louder, "James." Goosebumps covered my arms. It was like the hospital itself was alive. I turned to leave when something cold brushed past me. I froze. My breath quickened. I wanted to scream. I stumbled out of the room and felt the whispers following me down the hallway. I thought I was losing my mind. I told myself it was just the hospital being old and creaky, but deep down, I knew it was more. I no longer felt alone. That night changed everything for me. I wanted to run, to get away. But as I lay in bed after my shift, I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever haunted those halls was still there. I often wonder if it's watching me now. What was really happening after dark at St. Mary's? I guess I might never know. The following night, I arrived at St. Mary's with a sense of dread tightening in my chest. I pushed through the heavy doors, forcing myself to focus on my duties. The hospital was quiet, but the silence felt alive, humming with unspoken tension. I took a deep breath and made my way to the nurse's station. My first task was a routine check on Mrs. Jenkins again. As I walked past her room, readying myself for the encounter, I felt that familiar chill wash over me. The door was half open, and I hesitated. Inside, Mrs. Jenkins lay peacefully asleep, but something else caught my eye. On the wall opposite her bed, a shadow flickered, moving quickly. I blinked, but when I looked again, it was gone. I shook off the uneasy feeling, insisting I'd just imagined it. As the night wore on, I kept busy. Yet, with each tick of the clock, the atmosphere thickened. I couldn't help but glance over my shoulder as I checked on other patients. That's when I saw a figure at the end of the hall, standing still and watching. My heart dropped. I approached, cautiously, but as I drew nearer, the figure faded into the shadows. There was no one there. Just the beeping of machines and the sterile smell of the hospital. My palms were sweaty now. I must be losing it. I returned to the nurse's station, but every rustle made me jump. A few hours later, I had to refill a supply room. As I entered, a low whisper floated through the air. "James." It was so clear, almost intimate. I spun around, but there was nothing there again. I rubbed my eyes, my pulse racing. I was tired. I needed to breathe. That's when I heard a loud crash from the same hallway where I'd seen the figure. My heart raced, and I instinctively turned to see what had happened. Fear gripped me as I stepped out. The noise echoed down the corridor, drawing me towards the source. I could feel the tension build with each cautious step. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed a room with the door wide open. It was supposed to be closed. A chill ran through me, but I had to know. I peered inside. The room was empty, but the faintest smell of something rotten wafted toward me. My stomach churned. It felt like someone had just left. I turned to leave when a flash of movement caught my eye in the corner. It looked like a hand, pale, thin, and gripping the doorframe. I gasped and stumbled back. I blinked, and it was gone. I rushed out of the room, my skin crawling. I stopped at the nurse's station, trying to steady my breathing. My mind raced, piecing together what I'd experienced. That's when I heard the sound again, clearer this time, closer. "James." Panic surged as I felt the air grow colder. I knew then that it wasn't just my imagination. Something was in the building with me. Just as I was about to call for help, the lights above flickered violently before plunging the hallway into darkness. I was left in silence, engulfed by a suffocating blackness that felt like it was closing in on me. As I stood there, terrified and alone, I understood that I was far from the only one in St. Mary's that night. Suddenly, a cold breath brushed against my neck. I spun around, heart pounding, but there was nothing, just the empty hallway swallowing any hint of light. Everything went dark. My heart raced in the silence, and I strained to hear anything above my own breathing. Then, in the pitch black, something shifted, a faint rustling from the floor above. I froze. The faint sound resembled footsteps, echoing oddly against the sterile walls. I had to know what it was. Cautiously, I stepped toward the stairwell. My heart pounded louder with each creak of the old wooden steps beneath my feet. "Get a grip, James," I whispered to myself, reassuring but shaky. I reached the third floor, where an odd heaviness hung in the air. I squinted into the dark, searching for any source of light, but there was none. As I rounded a corner, I stumbled, nearly tripping over something on the floor. My hand shot out to grasp the railing, steadied me, and I could see a hint of movement down the hall. It was then I realized the voice again, more desperate, more urgent. "James." I turned to follow it, pulling my phone from my pocket to light my way. The dim glow revealed an office door ajar at the end of the corridor. My instinct told me to run, to get back to the safety of the nurse's station. But the voice seemed to call me. Help! I found my feet moving on their own, approaching the door carefully. "Hello?" I called out, trying to keep my tone steady. No response. Just silence returning in waves, washing back over me. I pushed the door open, and a heavy stench hit me like a wave, sickly sweet, like decay. The room was filled with shadows, and my phone's light flickered across the walls, revealing battered furniture and scattered papers. Something glimmered from the desk, and I forced myself to take a step forward. Something was off. That's when I saw it, a photo, a group of nurses from years gone by. I moved closer, eyes narrowing. One figure stood out, a woman with sharp features and a grim smile. Her eyes seemed to follow me. But it wasn't just the photo. I noticed a small name tag on the desk. Evelyn Harper, head nurse, 1983. I couldn't breathe. Just then, a sound behind me made me spin around. Nothing. Just the empty hallway behind me. I glanced back at the photo, feeling an absurd pull toward the woman's gaze. "What happened to you?" I whispered. In a flash, the lights returned, flooding the corridor with brightness. I staggered back, holding my breath. My heart rate steadied at the sight of familiar surroundings, but the comfort didn't last. A flicker caught my eye, and I turned again. An apparition shimmered at the far end of the hall. Evelyn. Her figure was translucent, standing strangely still as if caught in time. My stomach dropped. "James," she said, her voice echoing hauntingly, "you must leave." The words hung thick in the air, heavy with urgency. I felt the chill from earlier envelop me again, but this time I didn't hesitate. I dashed past her, propelled by sheer instinct. I couldn't look back. My feet carried me to the nearest exit, desperately searching for a way out, heart drumming as her voice trailed behind me. As I burst through the door, I slammed it shut behind me. But the question lingered in my mind: what had I just uncovered? I was racing against forces I didn't understand. What was Evelyn trying to warn me of? I leaned against the door, trying to catch my breath. The air outside felt different, cooler, almost refreshing compared to the suffocating atmosphere I had just escaped. But even here, my mind raced with what I had seen: Evelyn's ghostly figure, her desperate warning. I needed to talk to someone, but the thought of going back inside made my stomach twist. The main entrance of the hospital was eerily silent, the kind of silence that settled deep into your bones. I glanced around, hoping to spot anyone who could help or at least talk to me about what just happened. But the place felt deserted, the long corridors echoing emptiness. Still shaken, I grabbed my phone to check the time. Just after 2 in the morning. My shift didn't end for another hour. I had to keep moving, but where? I just couldn't face the hallways again. Then, suddenly, I heard a noise. It came from my left, close to the stairwell I had just exited. I turned, squinting into the shadows. For a moment, I thought I could make out a figure leaning against the wall, but as I stepped in that direction, it vanished. I rubbed my eyes, wondering if exhaustion was playing tricks on my mind. "Is anyone there?" I called out, my voice sounding small against the vast emptiness. No reply. Just that unsettling stillness. I shook my head, deciding to leave. I headed for the elevators, but as I pressed the button, it lit up and stayed that way. Clearly, the power was still fickle. I started pacing, trying to gather my thoughts. I had to figure out what to do next. As I turned, I spotted another door back toward the nurse's station slightly ajar, the faint light spilling out enticingly. Should I check it out? My instincts told me to stick to the main areas. But curiosity was a powerful thing, overriding my better judgment. I walked toward the door, pushing it open. The room was filled with medical supplies, but something caught my eye. A clipboard rested on the counter, its pages fluttering as if someone had just left in a hurry. I stepped closer, scanning the contents. My breath caught in my throat when I realized what it was: a log of patient treatments. The last entry was from 1983, and the name at the top read, Evelyn Harper. My heart raced again. It was her. Had she been trying to tell me something about her patients? Then I noticed other names listed below hers. Most were marked with notes that detailed severe cases, unusual ailments, all scratched out except for one. John Simmons, the incident. My eyes widened. That name sounded familiar. I had heard it whispered among the staff, a ghost story or perhaps more. Just as I was processing this, the lights flickered again, and everything went dark once more. Panic washed over me. I fumbled for my phone, praying the battery hadn't failed. Then came the sound: a low, guttural groan echoing through the stifling darkness. Someone or something was in the room with me. I froze, heart pounding, realizing I was not alone. I stood frozen, the darkness pressing in around me. The groan echoed again, closer this time. I strained my ears, trying to pinpoint its source. Was it just my mind playing tricks after everything I had seen? "Hello?" I managed to whisper, my voice cracking. No response, just the sound of my own shaky breath. I reached for my phone, praying for enough light to guide me. The screen flickered to life, casting a faint glow. The room looked even more ominous. Shelves lined with supplies loomed like shadows, and I could feel something in the air, a heaviness that made my skin crawl. I wanted to turn and run, but my legs felt glued to the spot. Another groan filled the silence, and this time I was sure it came from deeper in the room. I took slow, cautious steps forward, my heart racing with every inch. I raised the phone higher, trying to illuminate the far corners of the room. That's when I saw it, a figure crouched near the window. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice stronger now. I had to confront whatever was haunting me. The figure turned sharply, and I felt a jolt of terror as I recognized them. It was Evelyn, or at least her likeness, a pale silhouette of the woman from my vision, her hair flowing around her like mist. She looked right at me, those haunting eyes wide and desperate. "Help," she whispered, but her voice was barely a breath. It chilled me to the bone. Before I could respond, she flicked her gaze toward the door, and I realized she was warning me about something. "Wait. What do you mean?" I yelled, but she was already fading, slipping back into the shadows. My pulse quickened. I had to follow her, to understand, or was that what she wanted? With my heart pounding, I turned and dashed toward the door. I needed to get out of this room, away from this presence that seemed to draw me in. The clipboard from earlier still lingered in my mind. What had Evelyn Harper been trying to tell me? What had happened to John Simmons? Just as I reached the door, the lights flickered back on. The sudden brightness was blinding, and I shielded my eyes. When I could see again, I froze. The room was empty. No supplies. No ghostly figure. Just an empty space where darkness had felt alive moments ago. I stumbled out, breathing heavily. I was shaking, confused. Had it all been real? Or was my mind just fracturing under the weight of fear? I headed toward the nurse's station, desperate for someone, anyone, to talk to. But when I got there, the place was deserted. Then, I spotted something on the counter that turned my blood cold. It was another clipboard, this one folded closed. Against my better judgment, I picked it up. The name at the top made my stomach drop, John Simmons. Just then, a loud crash echoed from the end of the hallway. I turned sharply, my breathing quickening. Whatever was happening wasn't over. The night was just beginning, and I had to discover the truth behind those names, or I'd end up just like them. As I stood frozen at the nurse's station, my mind raced. John Simmons. The name echoed against the walls of my memory, but I couldn't quite place it. The sound of the crash reverberated again, pulling me back to the present. I had to investigate. I had to know what was happening. I slipped the clipboard under my arm and started down the dimly lit hallway, each step heavy with dread. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead as if they sensed my trepidation. I navigated past empty rooms with closed doors, my heart thudding in my chest. Whatever had caused that noise had to be significant. I neared the end of the hallway, and my breath caught in my throat. A door creaked open on its own. A chill ran down my spine. I hesitated, anger flooding me. I should have been braver, but the fear coursing through me was suffocating. I couldn't ignore it, though. I had to know what lay beyond that door. I approached, each squeak of my shoes amplifying the silence. Holding my phone out before me like a shield, I peeked inside the room. It appeared to be a storage area, cluttered with old equipment and abandoned supplies. The crash had come from here. As I stepped inside, the air felt colder. That's when I noticed something on the floor, a shattered mirror reflecting fragmented images of the room. My stomach twisted. I knelt down, reaching for a shard. That's when I saw the blood it smeared against the wall, dark and ominous. Panic surged through me. I stood up quickly, shaking. What had happened in this room? Was John Simmons involved? I could almost hear Evelyn's whisper beside me, urging me to leave. But I couldn't. Not yet. I turned, and that's when I froze again. A tall figure stood at the doorway, partially obscured in shadow. My heart raced, pounding hard against my ribcage. "Who are you?" I croaked, my voice shaking. The figure stepped forward, and my breath hitched. It was a man, gaunt with hollow cheeks and wild hair. His eyes were wide, darting between me and the broken mirror. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice quaking. "It's not safe." "Who are you?" I asked again, but he shook his head, backing away. "Leave now," he urged, glancing over his shoulder as if something lurked just beyond the door. I felt a tremor of dread. "Is it John?" I blurted out, hoping for some kind of answer. His eyes widened at the name, and I saw fear flash across his face. He turned to leave, but I was faster. "Wait. Tell me what you know." But he was already gone, slipping into the darkness of the hallway. I was left standing alone, trembling with unanswered questions. My phone buzzed in my pocket, breaking the silence. I pulled it out, heart racing, but it was just a notification from the hospital's system. My blood ran cold as I read the alert: missing patient, John Simmons. Last seen in room 204. In a rush of adrenaline, I dashed out of the storage room, urgency propelling me forward. I had to find him. I had to understand what happened. As I rounded the corner, the lights flickered dramatically, and I heard a desperate whisper echoing my name. I stopped dead in my tracks. Someone was in the building, and whatever was happening was far worse than I had ever imagined. My legs moved on instinct, carrying me back down the hallway, each step louder than the last. It felt like I was running in slow motion. My heart raced, a frantic drum echoing in my ears. I turned a corner, and the cold air stung my skin. I needed to find room 204. As I stumbled through the halls, I heard another sound shuffling, faint but distinct. I paused, straining to listen. It was coming from nearby, somewhere off to my left. Against all rational thought, I moved closer to the sound, driven by morbid curiosity. The hallway was dim, shadows stretching like fingers. The door to a small waiting area stood ajar. I lingered for a moment, heart pounding in my throat. The dim light inside flickered, shadows dancing against the walls. I pushed the door open slowly, my heart racing at the thought of what I might find. My breath caught. The room was empty, save for some chairs and a low coffee table stacked with old magazines. But scattered across the floor were things that shouldn't belong: pieces of medical equipment, scattered files, and a white lab coat. It was the same one I recognized from the nurse's station. My stomach twisted further. Then, I saw something glistening on the floor. I stepped inside, heart pounding as I bent to pick it up. It was a small badge. I turned it over: Dr. Tessa Mills. Now the name sounded familiar. I recalled John mentioning her in passing. "She is supposed to be the best for cases like mine," he said. Where was she? A sudden crash from down the hall jolted me upright. I straightened, adrenaline surging through my veins. I had to move. I had to find John. I slipped the badge into my pocket and dashed back into the hallway. I could hear my breath echoing, could feel the walls closing in. As I approached room 204, the door swung open forcefully. I staggered back. A figure stood silhouetted against the dim light inside, arms raised as if defending against something unseen. "John!" I shouted, but he didn't respond. Instead, he began to retreat, eyes wide with terror. "No! Don't come closer!" he shrieked, backing away. "It's not safe. You don't understand." What was happening? My head spun as dread washed over me. I felt trapped between the need to help him and the urge to run far away. "John, please!" I pleaded, stepping cautiously inside the room. "I'm here to help." "What is going on?" His gaze darted past me, panic etched deep on his face. "You don't get it. He's coming back." He turned abruptly, rushing toward the window, pressing himself against it as if it offered him refuge. "Who's coming?" "John." I pushed forward, desperate to grab his shoulder, but a sudden noise echoed from the darkness behind me, a low growl, deep and menacing. I froze, dread wrapping around me like a vice. Something was creeping closer, and whatever it was hungry. The lights flickered ominously, and just as I found the courage to turn, the door slammed shut behind me. I spun around, heart hammering against my ribs as the door slammed shut. Panic surged within me. I was trapped in this room with John, who was now a quivering shadow against the glass. "John! What is going on?" I pressed, my voice cracking under the weight of the moment. He didn't answer, just breathed heavily, wild-eyed. I stepped closer, hoping to find some clarity in his panic. "Get away from the window!" he shouted suddenly, startling me. "It can smell fear. It knows we're here." My mind raced. What was he talking about? But before I could voice my confusion, the growl came again, louder this time. It clawed at my sanity, sending chills racing down my spine. I edged toward him, scanning the room for anything that could help. "Do you have a plan?" I demanded, glancing at the door. The cold metal seemed to mock me. "What do we do?" He shook his head rapidly, tears glistening at the corners of his eyes. "We can't stay here. We have to get out." That was the wrong thing to say. Terror made my voice raise an octave. "Where are we supposed to go? You don't even know what's out there." At that moment, the lights flickered again, plunging the room into darkness. I felt the air shift, the presence grew closer, like a predator closing in on its prey. Then it happened. The window shattered with a sickening crash. I stumbled back, instinctively covering my head. Glass sprayed like deadly confetti. The hiss of something outside filled the air. I dared to look up, and my breath hitched in my throat. A dark silhouette appeared beyond the broken glass, moving with a predator's grace. It was massive, with sharp features and glowing eyes that pierced through the gloom, searching. "Stay back!" I yelled, instinctively taking a step toward John, ready to shield him. But he had already turned away, rushing for the door. I felt paralyzed. "John! No!" I screamed as he yanked the handle. It wouldn't budge. His panicked pounding against the door felt like thunder in my ears. There was no choice. I braced myself and darted toward the opposite wall, looking for an exit. A chill crawled over my skin. I noticed a small window on the far side of the room. If I could just help me. John screamed, his voice filled with terror. I turned back to him for a fleeting moment, and that's when I saw it. The dark figure was no longer outside, it was in the room, moving swiftly, expanding in the shadows. My gut told me to run. "John!" I yelled one last time. "Come on!" I sprinted to the window, adrenaline pushing me forward. The figure lunged, and I could feel the cold air of its presence brush against my back as I shoved my elbow against the window frame. It wouldn't break. Desperation clawed at my throat. Then everything seemed to distort as I braced for impact. Then everything went dark. I jolted awake, gasping for air. My heart raced, and the soft murmur of machines flooded my ears. I was lying on a narrow hospital bed, the sterile scent of antiseptic stinging my nostrils. Confusion swirled in my mind. How had I gotten here? I looked around. The room was dimly lit, shadows squirming in every corner. John was not beside me anymore. Panic gripped me again, but I forced myself to breathe deeply. I had to focus. The door creaked open, and a nurse stepped in. She looked familiar, but I couldn't place her. "You're awake," she said, managing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You've been unconscious for a bit." What happened? My voice was hoarse. I struggled to sit up, only to feel a wave of dizziness that forced me back down. Where's John? Her smile faltered. He's okay. Just, scared. Scared? What do you mean? Before she could answer, a distant scream echoed through the hallway. My blood ran cold. The nurse's face paled. She turned abruptly, eyes darting toward the door. I need to, she trailed off, glancing back at me before rushing out. I swung my legs over the bed, if only to shake off the feeling of helplessness. I had to find John. As I stood, the sterile flooring felt unnaturally cold beneath my bare feet. I could hear shuffling and whispers coming from the hallway, a cacophony of anxiety. I stepped into the corridor, following the sounds. The hallway was empty, and an unsettling quiet seemed to hang in the air. The fluorescent lights flickered above me, casting ghastly shadows. I turned a corner, and that's when I saw the first unsettling thing. A gurney lay abandoned, its straps hanging loosely. Blood soaked the sheets, dark and congealed. My stomach lurched at the sight. I glimpsed a torn piece of fabric snagged on the wheels John's shirt. John! I called out, my throat tightening. No response came, just an oppressive silence. I hurried down the hall, a sense of dread pooling in my gut. As I passed a supply room, I heard a hushed voice. Please don't let it in. It was John's voice. My heart dropped. I rushed to the door, but it was locked. John! Where are you? I shouted, pounding against it. Suddenly, the lights flickered once more, dimming to near darkness before bursting back to life. The voice ceased. I felt it, then a shift in the air that made the hair on my neck stand on end. A cold wind swept past me, and the door rattled ominously. I'm coming! I yelled, feeling a surge of determination. No more hiding. But as I stepped back, preparing to force the door, I was met by a figure at the end of the hallway. Someone shadowy, half illuminated by the flickering lights. It was watching me. Fear crashed over me like a wave. Just then, the lights went out again, plunging me into darkness. My heart raced as the growling noise from before echoed in my ears, making it hard to think. Help me! John's voice cried out faintly from somewhere close. My mind raced, and I took a step forward into the darkness. Then I heard it, a whisper, chilling and close. You shouldn't have come back. A new wave of terror crashed over me, and I understood I was not alone in this hospital. And I had no idea what was waiting for me in the dark. I stumbled through the thick darkness, disoriented and trembling. John's voice echoed in my mind, a lifeline of fear that pushed me forward. Help me! He cried again, and I grit my teeth, forcing myself to listen carefully. The growling was louder now, weaving in and out of John's pleas, a sinister melody I couldn't ignore. Fumbling through the dark, I reached for the nearest door frame, trying to steady myself. I could still hear John, the urgency in his tone pulling me from the edge of panic. I took a breath, reminded myself of the nurse's warning about not letting it in, and pressed farther into the gloom. Where are you? I called out softly, hoping he was close. The shadows shifted, and in the distance, I saw a flicker, then a flash of light as the fluorescent bulb sputtered back to life. I squinted against the brightness, heart racing. That's when I saw him. John stood near the end of the corridor, his back pressed against the wall, eyes wide with terror. James! He shouted, and relief flooded me. But it was short-lived. From the shadows behind him, a dark shape began to emerge, a figure cloaked in shadows, its form unnatural and shifting. Run! I yelled, racing toward him. The apparition lunged forward, causing the lights to flicker violently again, leaving trails of white against the darkness. John turned, terror transformed his face, and I felt an instinctual clutch at my chest. I reached him just as the figure extended its long, twisted arms. Get back! I shouted, pushing John down the corridor, my heart hammering in sync with the footsteps of the entity behind us. The stench of decay filled my nostrils as we dashed down the hallway, every ounce of fear fueling our escape. "Where do we go?" John gasped, glancing back. I could feel the creature's breath creeping in on us, a cold mist that raised the hair on my arms. "Towards the stairs," I replied, pushing him along. We rounded the corner, speeding to the stairwell that I desperately hoped would lead us out of this nightmare. Just as we reached the stairs, the creature let out a guttural roar, a sound that seemed to echo from every direction. It was close, too close. I took the steps 2 at a time, pulling John with me. The stairs creaked under our weight, and I could hear the pounding of the specter pursuing us, each step reverberating like a death knell. We burst through the door at the top, tumbling into a small storage area, and I slammed it shut behind us. John and I leaned against the door, gasping. What was that thing?" he whispered, the panic still gripping his voice. "I don't know," I replied, shaking slightly. "But it seemed to want something us." As we caught our breath, the ambient sounds of the hospital faded to an unnatural silence. My mind raced through everything that had happened: the whispers, Evelyn, the logs, the haunted corridors. I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had been hidden in this place was now awakened. "I need to find a way out of here," I murmured, more to myself than John. But as I peered around our small refuge, I felt a sense of foreboding. The room was filled with old medical supplies, but that familiar, sickly sweet scent returned, tinged with bitterness. It hung in the air like a memory I couldn't quite place. Suddenly, a loud crash erupted from the door we'd just come through. Both John and I jumped, heartbeats quickening. Whatever was out there was still after us. "Is there another way?" John asked, panic rising in his voice. I scanned the room and noticed a small window high above. "That's it. We can climb out." I pointed toward the opening. "Are you crazy? That's too high," he protested. The growl echoed again, mixed with the scratching from the other side of the door. There was no time to argue. I quickly shoved a rolling cart beneath the window and climbed on top. "Help me up," I shouted, reaching down for John, who scrambled up beside me. Together, we gripped the edges of the window and pulled ourselves higher. As we hoisted ourselves over the ledge and tumbled into the alley below, I braced myself for the impact. When my feet hit the ground, I felt a jolt of adrenaline, but I wasn't done yet. We glanced back up at the window, and for a terrible moment, I expected to see the shadowy figure peering down at us. But it was empty. Still shaken, I pulled John to his feet. "We have to get to my car," I urged, scanning the area for any signs of life. Racing through the alley, I thought about how everything had led to this moment. Though we'd escaped, the questions remained: what had happened to John? Why was Evelyn haunting the hospital? As we reached the street, heavy rain began to pour, washing away the remnants of the horrors within St. Mary's. I shoved my keys into the ignition and glanced at John, who was staring off into the distance. "Are you okay?" I asked, but he didn't respond. I could see the weight of what we'd just endured hanging over him. The haunting sights of the hospital burned in my memory: Evelyn's desperate gaze, the growling presence lurking behind us in the shadows. And as I drove away, a tightness settled in my chest. I wanted to believe we were free, that we had escaped whatever darkness had sought us out, but I also knew that in my heart, the question lingered like the fading echoes of the whispers: would we ever truly be safe? I moved to a different city a few weeks later, seeking distance from the shadows of St. Mary's. But in quiet moments, when the rain taps against the window, I find my thoughts wandering back to that hospital, to John, to the specter of Evelyn, and the unspeakable truths hidden behind those walls. Sometimes, I wonder if those things still happen there, if the whispers still call for someone to listen. And more than once, I've wondered if I might return someday, drawn back into the darkness I thought I had escaped.